everybody. My name is Brent, and you're listening to the LJS podcast, episode number 6, where today we're going to be talking about why jazz is important to society. And this is such an important episode. In fact, if you never listen to any other episode of this podcast ever again, at least please listen to this episode. This is all about why we even do what we do here on Learn Jazz Standards. It's why I do what I do. It's my life goal, my life mission. All of this is embodied in this topic. So I really hope you'll stay tuned with us and check out this episode. But before we get started, all the music on today's show is by our founder, Camden Hughes, from his album Introspective. And so if you like the music on today's show and maybe you want to buy the album, you can go to his website, camdenhughes.com, and go to camdenhughes.com/store. And if you're listening to this on the website, you can find that link in the show notes. And one more thing before we get started. If you find value in this podcast, we hope that you will add value back. This podcast is 100% supported by listeners like you. And we hope to always keep this podcast ad-free. So if you're listening on the website, there's a support button right below the player. If you click that support button, you can add a one-time or monthly donation. We'd greatly appreciate it. And if you're not listening on the website, you can go to learnjazzstandards.com/support. We'd really appreciate your help and support for this podcast. Okay, so let me kick off this podcast episode with a little bit of a story. So this last week, my wife was talking with one of her coworkers, and somehow in this conversation, they got to this point in this conversation, and I'm not exactly sure how it got here, but it was talking about artists and why they are doing it professionally. and what her coworker basically was saying, to summarize, was that artists should blame themselves for picking the career that they did. It's nobody else's fault but theirs that they are poor. They should have realized that people won't support the services of their artistry and therefore find a new job. And I thought that was an interesting argument. And my first thought when she told me this, she was a little bit upset and telling me about what this guy said. And the first thing that I thought was, well, he's kind of right. I mean, there is actually some truth in the fact that, well, artists should know what they are getting themselves into. We all know that in general, being a musician or being an artist, if you're trying to do it professionally, it doesn't necessarily, there's no promise of fame or glamour or riches. It's something that you get into to, almost follow your heart in a way. It's for the love of the art and to just be able to make, a reasonable living off of it is an honor for me anyways. But artists should know what they're getting into. Musicians especially know what you're getting into. And so I thought that side of his argument was reasonable. You can't blame anybody if you're not making quite enough money or if you're not, doing as well as you'd like to do. But the part of his argument that was especially weak, in my opinion, is the part where he said that people should realize that they won't be supported by society, so they should switch to another job. Because the problem with that argument is, the overarching problem is that you're basically saying that art does not have worth in society. There's not enough worth, and so therefore you should just go to something else. And what's the problem with that? Well, then if you have no artists doing art, then you don't have art at all. And please, for a second, imagine life without art. Imagine life without music. I'll go further into that imagination if you can't do it right now. I'll go into more of what that would actually be like and how bad that would actually be. But devaluing art in society, I think that we should be asking a different question. We need to start evaluating why music is not valued as much in society and come to that conclusion. And then we have to define why it is. Why is music valuable? And specifically today, I want to go into why jazz is important to society. Because jazz is what this website's all about. It's what I do. It's what everything I do is about. So I hope you'll join me for this conversation, and we're going to go ahead and talk about first why music is important to society, and then we'll go into why jazz specifically is important in society. So I first want to talk about why music is important to society rather than going specifically into why jazz is, because I think it's important to understand that music of all genres plays an important role in all over the world in our daily lives. And so the first point I want to make about why music is important to society is that it's important just for general living. I want you to think a second for every form of entertainment you know. Movies, commercials, background music in restaurants, just general entertainment. And then suddenly take music out of all of those. And what do you have? You have nothing. What makes a movie exciting? Music. What creates ambiance in a restaurant? Music. Have you ever been in a restaurant without music? It's awkward. I mean, I could go for a million of different examples, but if you strip away music just from those basic forms of entertainment, then we're missing out on so much that builds our everyday life. People go to music to get through hard times. I know I have songs that I can think about in my life where I went through a difficult period of time in my life, and there's specific songs that almost represent those times. It's almost like a soundtrack of my life. Music just has this way of uniting people together, to draw people together emotionally. And that's so important. And the arts do in general, but I'm specifically talking about music. Also, one really big one, really big one, is the same as food kind of defines culture, so does music. You know, what kind of music came from this country and this country and this country and what that sounds like. And then even on a historical level, during this time period, what did it sound like? And then where did it go to? It kind of defines different moments of history for us in culture that just enrich us, enrich our everyday lives, you know, show the differences between each other and how we can come together. And another point I really want to make about why music is important to society is it's important to have in education. Okay, there's been many studies done that, especially for kids, for young kids in elementary school or even younger than that in high school, is it really helps develop the brain at a young age. In general. So, you know, it helps develop language and reasoning skills. It improves memorization. There's been studies that show that students that were in music courses and took music classes and were involved in playing instruments and singing, that they scored higher on SAT tests than those that didn't. It helps you with pattern recognizations, memorizing patterns and understanding how things work logically. It helps left brain developing ways of thinking, but of course it also helps right brain, the creative side. It stimulates that and strengthens and builds that side. It also increases coordination, you know, the same as sports can do the same thing, throwing balls, catching balls, and all these different things that you can do in or soccer and those skills. It's the same with music. It also builds those up together. And this is why I so believe in building education in schools, music education in schools, not taking it away, and making that such an important part of our society, because not only does it help inspire a future generation of artists, it helps build every other industry, every other career in this world, because it's such a healthy part of the learning process. So music is important to societies, to me, for all those different reasons. We can't not have music, and therefore we need to be supporting music in our society today. Okay, so you've probably heard a lot of those arguments about why music is important to society, or why music is important in general. So probably a lot of those things I just said to you aren't really, that mind-blowing or groundbreaking, but I'm sure that you're wondering why I think jazz specifically is important to society. This one might be, some of these ideas might be a little bit new to you. So I'm sure you're curious about this. And believe me when I say this, I really do believe that jazz is not just important to musicians or music history or other genres of music. Jazz is important to everyday people, whether you're, a hobbyist musician, whether you're a professional musician, a student, whether you're a CEO of a company, whether you work at a gas station, whether you work, you're a farmer. It doesn't really matter what job you do. I still think that jazz is important to everybody. So I really believe that jazz is important to everybody, and I kind of want to start out by reading this speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This was his opening address at the 1964 Berlin Jazz Festival. So let me read this for you. These words are just too good not to share with you. God has wrought many things out of oppression. He has endowed his creatures with the capacity to create, and from this capacity has flowed the sweet songs of sorrow and joy that have allowed man to cope with his environment and many different situations. Jazz speaks for life. The blues tell the story of life's difficulties, and if you think for a moment, you will realize that they take the hardest realities of life and put them into music, only to come out with some new hope or sense of triumph. This is triumphant music. Modern jazz has continued in this tradition, singing the songs of a more complicated urban existence. When life itself offers no order and meaning, the musician creates an order and meaning from the sounds of the earth which flow through his instrument. It is no wonder that so much of the search for identity among American Negroes was championed by jazz musicians. Long before the modern essayists and scholars wrote of racial identity as a problem for a multiracial world, musicians were returning to their roots to affirm that which was stirring within their souls. Much of the power of our freedom movement in the United States has come from this music. It has strengthened us with its sweet rhythms when courage began to fail. It has calmed us with its rich harmonies when spirits were down. And now, jazz is exported to the world. For in the particular struggle of the Negro in America, there is something akin to the universal struggle of modern man. Everybody has the blues. Everybody longs for meaning. Everybody needs to love and be loved. Everybody needs to clap hands and be happy. Everybody longs for faith. In music, especially this broad category called jazz, there is a stepping stone towards all of these. Aren't those amazing words by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? I mean, he pretty much for me just said everything I want to say. But of course, I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on my thoughts. Let me start with the first thing that I think what makes jazz important to society, kind of reflecting on those words. And the first one is jazz teaches us to have courage. The Wayne Shorter, of course, you all know the saxophonist Wayne Shorter. He was once asked in an interview, how would you describe jazz in like a sentence or a few words? And he just said simply, "I dare you." So jazz meant to him, "I dare you." Isn't that interesting? But we see that in jazz music. Jazz music is African-American music. It was born out of the struggles of slavery and the blues. And then it was born out of New Orleans, this melting pot of culture back in that time and still to this day. And it was born out of this struggle and this oppression, and then it stretched out into different communities and ethnic cultures, and now it's all over the world. But it was born out of that kind of that feeling of courage, of speaking out. Jazz is not afraid to be vulnerable with you. Jazz is all about, I'm going to say what I'm going to say relentlessly. It doesn't matter. It's that expression when you hear a great jazz solo. It's yelling out, at the top of its lungs. This is who I am. Here's my music for you to listen to. I'm not going to be ashamed of what I have to say. It's going to be me, mistakes and all. Here it is. And that's what jazz teaches us. It teaches us to have courage. It's this incredible music born out of incredible circumstances that really is all about self-expression and having courage, whether it be the freedom movement for African Americans, and whether it be, today for us, no matter, what the color of your skin or religion or anything that you are, it comes out of this feeling of just expressing and not being afraid. So jazz teaches us to have courage. The next thing that jazz teaches us as a society, and why it's important as a society, is it teaches us to improvise. So for one second, I want you to think about just your everyday life. When you're talking with somebody, when you're walking across the street, when you're going to the store, all these things will come up in those instances where you didn't expect them to happen. Someone will say something to you didn't expect. On your way to the store, something might block your path, or there's a many things that could happen to you every day. And what we have to learn to do is improvise, and that's exactly what jazz does. Jazz is all about improvising. Okay, jazz musicians are trained to improvise, to respond to the moment, to listen to the other musicians around them. What are they playing? Because what they're playing is going to influence what I'm playing. And when I'm taking a solo, I might have worked on a lot of things that are just naturally going to happen. But in general, I don't really know what I'm going to play before I start doing it. I didn't learn my solo verbatim. I'm just playing what's coming out. And that's the truest form of improvisation. And so jazz musicians are trained to improvise. So improvisation is so important to everyday life. And that's what the jazz musician is about. So jazz teaches us to improvise. And I think that's something incredibly important. It's a great life value, a great, practical skill that all of us need to know. And another thing that jazz teaches us is it teaches us to innovate. Okay, it teaches us to innovate. And this is one that really strikes me as something that's valuable to society. Is jazz musicians are constantly, expected to come up with something new, right? Like I said, it plays into this improvisation kind of a thing. They have to come up with things on the spot. They have to come up with new music, come up with new ideas. And that's so important in our modern day society where we're full of scientific breakthroughs and we're constantly being expected to innovate and come up with new ways to do things in the workforce. I mean, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a jazz musician. It can be anything that you do in your life. We are constantly being, asked to innovate things. And jazz teaches us that we can do that. And jazz teaches us how to do that. This goes back to education in the schools. It's important for kids to start learning early how to do these skills. Jazz teaches us these different skills. And it's so important to realize that. So jazz teaches us to improvise, and it also teaches us to innovate. And these things don't necessarily need to be applied to life as a musician. They can apply to life as any kind of occupation that you might have. Another really important thing that jazz teaches us as a society is that everyone's voice is equal. So when someone's taking a solo, it goes one after another. One person takes a solo, then the next person in line takes a solo, and the next person in line, and everybody listens to each other taking their solos. And it's showing us, it's kind of a representative thing of, everybody has their equal time to say what they need to say. It doesn't matter if you're, not as good of a musician as the next. It doesn't really matter if, you know, you look like that, or you look like this, or you come from here, or you come from there. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I live in New York City. It's an incredibly diverse city, and we have people from all over the world, all ethnic backgrounds, all religions. It doesn't matter. We all come onto the bandstand and we play music together. And that's what jazz teaches us. It teaches us that all voices are equal. Everybody has their turn to say what they're going to say. You take a solo, then I'll take a solo, then he takes a solo, then she takes a solo. And that's an incredibly great life concept. Again, especially for kids to realize early on. It creates such a healthy society, I believe. And kind of on that same notion, jazz teaches us to listen. More than ever of any other kind of music I know, jazz just really forces you to listen. Whether you're just a listener listening to music, or whether you're actually a jazz musician. So if you're a listener, jazz really is the kind of music that it really kind of asks you to listen. It kind of demands that you listen to it. At least if you really want to get something out of it a lot. I mean, you can have it on in the background and it creates a nice ambience. Of course, there's a lot of gigs like that I play. But if you really want to get the most out of jazz, it really requires that you listen intently, that you listen to what the soloist is doing, you listen to what the rhythm section is doing. It's kind of an engaging music. It asks you to be engaged. It's not something that you just blare on the radio while you're driving down the street, or, I mean, you can, but it's not really made for that. It's not the hit single kind of culture. It's music that's art. You listen to it, you focus on it. You can get something deep out of it if you try. So it teaches us to listen as just general listeners, regardless of you're a musician. If you're a musician, it really, really works those skills. Because like I said, if you're going to be improvising, if you're going to be innovating, you have to really have your ears open to what the rest of the band's doing. What are you doing? What's your environment around you asking you to do? So you have to be listening. Where am I in the song right now? How do I keep my spot? Is the bass player playing something different than I am? If so, I need to check up on that to make sure we're on the same page. It's these kinds of things that are constant challenges in the jazz world. So jazz, it teaches us that everyone's equal. Everybody has their time in the spotlight to say what they need to say unashamedly. And then it also teaches us to listen. Listen to the other person speaking. Listen to the music and what it's saying. Listen to the world around you and ask yourself what it's saying. These are very important lessons that jazz is teaching us today. So I want to conclude this episode by going back to that story that I was telling you at the beginning with my wife and that discussion she had with her coworker. Where he was right is, yes, it's hard to be an artist. It's hard to be a musician. It doesn't always pay a lot of money, and it takes a lot of struggle. And yes, society is not always on the musician's side. But that's not the point. The point is not how much money can you make off of the arts. The point is we need the arts as a society, and society needs to realize that we need the arts and we need to support the arts. So I know that a lot of the listeners on this podcast today, you're a hobbyist. You might play jazz for fun. You might just like listening to jazz. And I'm not really talking to professional musicians at all right now, but I am talking to all of the people that love jazz out there today. And I just want to say thank you for supporting jazz. Thanks for supporting music. Continue to support the industry. We need it. And continue to love the music, because music is important. It's special. I don't need to tell you this. You know this. You feel this in your heart. So thank you so much for supporting jazz. It's not about the money. It's about enriching the lives that we live. So continue to support jazz. Continue to support music. It's an alive music. It's a living music. And I just want to thank all of you for being a part of that. All right, and that's all for this episode today. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sticking around. And if you're on the website right now, feel free to leave us a comment. in our comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts about why you think that jazz is important to society and anything else you'd like to say. And remember, if you got some value out of this podcast today, consider adding value back. This podcast is 100% supported by listeners like you. On the website, if you click the support button under the player, you can add a monthly or one-time donation. We would really appreciate it. If you're not on the website, you can go to learnjazzstandards.com/support, and you can support us there. We thank you very much. And next week, we're going to be coming out with our episode number 7 of the LJS podcast. We'll see you then.